Hello and welcome to Scarves Around the Funnel, the podcast dedicated to Heart of Midlothian Football Club. It wasn't to be on Saturday night, the third of three games in just 6 days, ultimately proving just too much for a bruised and battered squad. With me to discuss the Scottish Cup defeat to Falkirk and look ahead to the massive game this weekend on Sunday against Celtic. First of all, my regular sidekick, Mr. Scott McIntosh. Hello, you.
Evening, evening to you both. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting last 7 days. I think we have questioned just what this team, couldn't do, and I think they were stress testing that theory at times last week, but they were even managing to overcome those hurdles in the league. And I think Saturday possibly was just one game too much for them, and that's something we might touch on this evening in terms of what maybe could have done better or slightly differently, but ultimately it was maybe just a step too far in terms of playing off the back of those two games with 10 men.
Yeah, it was. And now it's Celtic's turn because they're in Bologna in Italy on Thursday night. Quick turnaround. They face Hearts. Hearts have pretty much had or will have had an 8-day break from the Falkirk game before facing Celtic on Sunday. That will be discussed. Our next guest this evening, very good friend of mine, a massive Jambo, and a surname entwined in the history of our club. Hello, Mr. Iain Mercer.
Good evening. How are we?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Nice to be on the programme tonight. And
Indeed.
yeah, and much like Scott, been a difficult week for the club, difficult week for the team, but I think they've got a wonderful opportunity on Sunday, and hopefully they've all got their feet up.
Yes, sometimes you kind of want straight after a game, usually a win, to, oh, let's do a podcast because you're buzzing, the adrenaline's flowing. I think it's not a bad thing that this is maybe a couple of days after the Falkirk game because immediate impressions afterwards were, oh no, the end of the world, no, what's going to happen next? And then you wake up on Sunday and you're pissed off, you're out the cup, and then the cup draw takes place. And then on Monday, it's still sore, but you're like, hold on here, now we can focus on Celtic and you're looking for positives. All that still to come. Later in the show as well, we'll take a look back with Iain at his dad's legacy, both with Hearts and in Scottish football. And doing so today because it's 20 years since we sadly lost Wallace Mercer in January 2006. Before that, we'll rip the band-aid off. We'll try and analyse what went wrong for Hearts at Tynecastle on Saturday night. You're listening to Scarves Around the Funnel, sponsored by Forrest Hepburn and McDonald Signs. Scott McIntosh, let's start with you and the team selection for the Falkirk game. I'll give you the 11 players, recapping for that, and then you can kind of explain, was it a 4-3-3, was it a 4-2-3-1? Just what was it? With Swallow in goal, Altona, Kent, Halka and McCart, Benny, Milne, Braga, Magnuson, Kizaridis and Shanklin. What did you make of that and what did you see?
I think it was two slightly different formations based on when we had the ball and when we didn't. I think it was defending as a four, but then I think when we were in possession of the ball, I think it switched over to maybe more of a back three. I think McCart sort of slotted in as a third centre half. I think they were trying to push Altena further up into a sort of wing back position. And then Kizaridis was kind of almost dropping into a left wing back position. And then you had Braga trying to sort of almost accompany Shanklin in a front two. So there was a bit of a variance in terms of when we had the ball and when we didn't. I think I think he was trying to work around the Harry Milne situation. I think as of Saturday, they probably weren't too sure in terms of whether they could maybe force McAtee into being available for the Celtic game. And we already knew by then the situation regarding Benny and Cammy Devlin. So he's probably had one eye on the Celtic game when he's picked the team on Saturday, but probably just with the Harry Milne inclusion in midfield. I think he was wanting to see how he could maybe slot in there. And because of that, he sort of maybe tweaked one or two things with the rest of the team selection. Stuart Finlay, I think, wasn't 100% either, which meant he was out the team. I think given how important he and Halkett have been, it would have been good to have seen maybe both of them get somewhat of a rest on Saturday. But apart from that, you can't really have too many grumbles with how the team was set up, because actually in the first half we actually played okay. We played some decent stuff. So
Hmm.
I don't think it was so much the team selection. It's possibly what happens from half time onwards that ultimately loses us the match more than anything.
Yeah, the issue of having a big squad or having a deep enough squad will be discussed later on with Hearts. Mercer, you're a season ticket holder and have been forever, but circumstances meant you couldn't be at the game on Saturday, albeit you watched it on TV. Something that caught me when you and I spoke yesterday over the phone, you said you didn't have a great feeling about this game prior to kickoff. Was that because, as I mentioned in the introduction, I don't know what or how much we had left in the tank because of the effort that was put in with 10 men for as long in the games against Dundee and in the midweek game against St Mirren? Was that the reason why you weren't as optimistic as you normally are?
Yes, I mean I was at Dundee and I was at the St Mirren game, and as you rightly say, I missed the match in person on Saturday. But um, first and foremost, I knew they were playing a very good football team. I mean, Falkirk are a very good team. I
Hmm.
thought John McGlynn would come to the game full of energy, and I thought they would smell blood. And I just had this feeling that it wasn't going to be our night for whatever reason. I thought the players looked jaded on Wednesday night at the end of the game, and I just had a suspicion that if Falkirk could get themselves to half time goalless, I thought we could be in trouble, and it would go the distance, certainly to extra time. So I had no crystal ball. It was just my feeling. And over the years we've seen it before with Hearts teams. They've been on good runs or whatever, and then they've come to a cup game and it's just not quite worked out. So I just had it, felt it in my waters on Saturday night. But as Scott said, I thought we played decent football in the first half. Um, I thought Harry Milne, I thought the workload that he was getting through, but also that he was asked to do was maybe too much, because actually he was being asked to do a job in the midfield, but also support Kizaridis as well on that left-hand side. And I felt in the second half, Kizaridis was totally isolated. And to a point, he was trying to do too much himself in the first half as well. And I've noticed that some teams are starting to pick up on that, because he always cuts in onto his right foot. He's always trying to shape that shot, and that's becoming a little bit of a problem. But yeah, it was just, as Scott said again, it's just a game too far, I thought.
Well, you were right with that feeling. And if you've got a feeling that we're going to win the league, just tell us, and you could save us for a whole lot of medicinal issues between now and May.
I know, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's a long slog ahead, and fitness wise, and whatever else. There's a lot of chapters still to be written. Unfortunately, not one of
Yeah.
them in the Scottish Cup because Hearts were knocked out. But Scotty, as you and Mercer were talking about, this was a game where we actually started pretty well. We played well in the first half. I think it was like half an hour before Falkirk had a chance to really test Swallow. Were you satisfied with the start we made to the game, given that we have been kind of slow out the blocks in a few matches of late?
I mean, I was happy with how we were playing to an extent. We were playing some good football in terms of build-up play. I just felt like in that final third, it wasn't really coming together. There wasn't really a lot of clear-cut opportunities in front of goal. We hadn't really tested Scott being out. So going into half-time, I think you were relatively happy, but there was always the concern in the back of your mind that a lot of these players had played significant amount of time with 10 men during the last two fixtures. So there's maybe a slight concern that we didn't get that advantage during the first half. And really, the concerns probably started as soon as you see that Falkirk make that triple sub, because you can see that John McGlynn has identified that this was probably maybe half of it was his thinking of we've not really got a foothold in the game. But I think he's possibly went in prior to this match thinking if we can get to 0-0, I've got one or two subs in the back of my mind that I think I'll make early doors to maybe try and push the issue a little bit. So there was a bit of a concern then when I saw that Falkirk made that switch and they were proactive in that situation, which meant that McIntosh had to sort of watch that pan out for 10 minutes before deciding what he needed to do. And then ultimately, it kind of falls apart a little bit over a 5 minute spell just round about the first sub that we make.
Yeah, we didn't make that sub until the 57th minute when Spittle came on for McCart. Falkirk's triple change, as you mentioned, with Marsh, Wilson, and Parkinson on for Yates, Stewart, and Cartwright. So between the respective changes, Falkirk's at half time and Hearts in the 57th minute, Hearts Merce thought they had gone ahead. Thomas Magnusson getting the final touch after Altona's free kick was flicked on by McCart and Magnusson smashed home from close range. For me, it's clear, there's no doubt. If the person that puts the ball in the back of the net has handled the ball, then it gets chalked off. I have no idea what Michael Stewart was on about during the coverage on Premier Sports. The issue that I've got here, Merce, is some of the games had VAR in the fourth round and others didn't. Dunfermline Hibs was among the majority that didn't, but Hearts against Falkirk did. Now, look, do I want us to benefit from something that might be illegal, but VAR's not allowed to intervene because it's not in place? Yeah, I do, but it's frustrating that it's either all or none with or without VAR. But this was the right decision, wasn't it?
Yes, on first looking of it, I was in the Michael Stewart camp. I didn't think he had handled the ball. I mean, they showed it so many times, but having looked at it again and watched it again, it was a handball. It rolled. It did come off his arm. Um, the one that they should have given it and they should have inspected was the one with Blair Spittle because he was tripped. He was clipped in the box and he went down and it should have been a penalty kick. Um, I'm just done with you. We've benefited from VAR a number of times this season with decisions that have gone our way,
It's not a good spectacle, though, is it?
but it's not. And I'm done with VAR to be honest. It just does my head in completely. It's
It's a
so
Fisher Price.
inconsistent.
Yeah.
There's
It-
no you never know what you're going to get. There's inconsistency, as you say, and it's just ruining the game as a spectacle. So I'm not turning it into a VAR debate, but I don't have a good feeling about it.
Well, no one does that goes to games. It's just the way. I mean, you look at the Hearts Twitter account. 52 minutes, Hearts strike first. VAR is checking for a potential handball. Nearly in the 56th minute when it's chalked
Yeah,
off. And we've seen lots of instances in Scottish football and English football and all sorts. And when it's used right, it works. But it's Fisher Price toys that we're using to try and deal with professional football. And it's the human element in Scottish football
Yeah,
that's the problem,
yeah.
not VAR, Scott.
I, f- I think the issue for me. So look, the IFAB rules are really clear around handball. If there's any, uh, if there's any sort of, positive that a player gets for the ball touching his hand, whether it's accidental or not, then it has to get ruled out. So that's fine. That's a binary issue. That's fine. My issue with the implementation of VAR once more on Saturday is around the time that it takes. And
Hmm.
again, you go back to when VAR was first implemented in 2022. There was a clear or I felt there was a clear understanding that when it was implemented, it was to look into clear and obvious errors. Now, again, it goes back to this whole issue of something taking 4 minutes. When does that stop being a clear and obvious error? How many times do you need to see that footage to realise that he handles it? And this is where I get a bit frustrated with the use of VAR. It wasn't supposed to be used to re-referee the games. And again, there's other reasons why that's happening because they're putting the more experienced referees in the VAR room and they're bringing, or they're kind of upgrading these guys or fast tracking them for the lower leagues into positions that they're maybe not ready for to be on the pitch, and they're taking the word of the guys in the VAR room. So the games are being re-refereed. What was telling for me was that on Saturday, Dundee United, who would have been one of the clubs who insisted that we went ahead with VAR without consulting the fans about how that would affect the match day experience, when they get that opportunity,
Hmm.
as in, do you want to use it or not? They decided not to use it
Yeah.
for their home tie against Ayr United. So that to me is quite telling. So why can't the clubs just admit that they understand that there's an issue with this and we go back to the table with it and they actually consult with the fans? Again, I've always had an issue with Hearts about this being a fan-owned club. that not being brought to the table with the fans. That was a huge own goal for the club. And like Mercer said, there is times where it's benefited us. I think St Mirren away is probably one of the biggest
Yes.
examples of it this season for that third goal that was disallowed for them. But as a match day experience, it's horrendous. I really do hate it. And again, taking 4 minutes to judge something, they should have a timer set. If you can't decide, if you can't make that decision in 30 seconds, then it goes past that threshold. That clear and obvious threshold is then met, and then you stick with the on-field decision.
Yeah.
This is where I get annoyed with it.
The weird thing with this is, though, that we saw the footage. We saw the handball within the first few looks. Now, this is where I want to back Derek McInnes here, because when he was interviewed afterwards, he'd only seen it from one angle. He hadn't seen the angle that clearly shows that there's a handball. I don't know what Michael Stewart's excuse is, because I thought he made an arse of
I think
himself.
Michael just dug a grave and just couldn't get himself out,
Oh,
unfortunately.
yeah, double down, triple
No
down,
matter how many
quadruple down.
long pauses Rory Hamilton was given to try and
Oh, he
clear
gave him a
it. I
chance, didn't
felt for
he?
Rory in that situation more than
Oh,
anyone else.
he gave him so many opportunities, but he just struggles with the laws of the game, which is not great if you're an analyst or a co-commentator on a game of football. It's clearly the correct decision because it's a handball, whether you like it or not. It doesn't need to be arm outstretched. It's hit his hand. Derek McInnes, when he was interviewed, hadn't seen that. I'm sure if you spoke to him now, he'd be like, fair dues. But so going back to something Mer said about the Blair Spittle incident and how Spittle, felt it should have been a penalty. Mer says that as well. What did you think about this one, Scott?
So the Spittle one and the penalty we get through Chznikov, they to me fall in that bracket of VAR tends to go with the on-field decision. So they tend not to deem it to be a call that they need to get involved in. So I think so the Chesnikov incident where we get the penalty, if the referee doesn't give that, I don't think VAR intervenes
No,
and gives that.
agreed.
And it's the same with the Spittle. I think if we get that decision, I don't think VAR intervenes and tells the referee that he's incorrect. It's in that sort of unfortunate, sort of muddy area that I think you sometimes get with certain penalty awards. It's a bit like the Harry Milne one at Ibrox, where it's like we get it, they don't intervene, but if we hadn't got it, I'm pretty sure VAR wouldn't have intervened on that one as well. It's something you see, you get examples of it all the time. For me, from a Hearts point of view, I would have preferred if we'd got it, but aye, I probably bracket that in with the Chesnikov decision where they're on that sort of marginal soft side, so I can see them being given and not given on a week to week basis.
Mers,
Mhm. Yeah.
you see
No,
similarities?
pardon?
You see similarities with what Scott's saying, the Chesnikov and the Spittle one?
Yeah, no, I do, but I did think that the Spittle one should have been intervened. I do think they should have said we need to have a look at that, or you should have a look at that. Um, but yeah, it's just frustrating. It's just a frustrating system, and yeah, hopefully they can improve it.
77th minute. The man whose plane we tracked, the KLM flight from Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, he's been there. He's been the man in the hood, an unused sub against Dundee and against St Mirren. We finally got to see young Islam Chesnikov, Merce. Now, he's won the penalty. There's already Hearts fans saying, nah, miles off it. Of course he's miles off it. He's not played since November. And Derek McInnes has made this clear. He's not ready to start yet. So what did we see with this cameo appearance for 13 minutes plus extra time from Islam Chesnikov, Merce?
What did we see? Well, what we saw, I thought, was a bit more directness than what we've been seeing out of Carriota, um, who I don't think, in the opportunities he's had, certainly that I've seen, he's been direct enough. I think he's
Not
always
been
tried to
many
cut.
opportunities, though.
No, I know that, but he's had a few now, and I've not seen him try to beat his man. He always cuts in on his left foot to try and shape that crossing that we benefited from when Falkirk scored that fantastic winner in the derby. I did see Chesnikov taking a different approach. He's obviously a different type of player. He looks stronger, taller, and I think he's going to be a good physical prospect. But it's going to take him a while to get up to speed, clearly. Um, but I thought he used his body well to get that penalty. The way he sort of leant into the Falkirk player and just sort of, made him lunge in and take him down. Um, Time will tell. He's been given the big talk up, and I just hope he's given the time to get himself physically prepared to make an impact.
There's the
And I think
key.
that the Hearts supporters need to give him that time, need to give him
Hmm.
that chance, because he's been given, like I say, he's been given big build up. But now he's finally here. I don't think we'll see the best of him for a good few weeks.
Or maybe until next season
Yeah,
with the pre-season under his belt.
potentially.
We don't know. Scott, we're not unique as Hearts fans to kind of make our mind up on a player after seeing them for 13 minutes and extra time, are we? Every football fan does that. Once they make their mind up, that's it. It's very difficult to change.
Yeah, and there's also the context that this has been nearly a year-long pursuit as well. So I think when you add that in there, there's that intense sort of that expectation that's been building over months with him. I think he's got the genetic makeup to suggest that he'll more than handle himself, but potentially to his detriment. I was very concerned he was going to get sent off at one point at the weekend. Uh, I think the circumstances weren't ideal to bring him in. And again, this isn't just Saturday, this includes the Dundee and St Mirren games. It would have been great to have had a comfortable game out of those three where you're 2 or 3 goals up, you've got a team pressing the game, and you can maybe put Chznikov on knowing that there's space to exploit in behind their backline. It was sort of all hands on deck for Falkirk at the point that he came on. By that point, Braga was already off the park. Uh, we'd had to make a change at right back as well. So you had Magnuson sort of filling in at right back, which wasn't overly ideal. So when you add in all these factors, I don't think it was the greatest sort of environment to be throwing him in on, especially like Mercer was saying there, he's not kicked a ball for a couple of months. So I felt for him in that respect. But I suppose the hope is that it ends up being a reversal of Gerald Taylor. If we all think back to his wonderful debut and then what happened afterwards, maybe it's going to be some sort of reverse of that. So, look, it's not his fault that he's coming into a position that we've struggled for some time now. So that's not really his fault. That's just something where we've had to be patient and wait on him to come through. Unfortunately, again, when we had designs to sign him even back in the summer, and we knew we were getting him in on this pre-contract in January, I don't think anyone at the club envisioned us to be in this position in the league.
Mm.
And we probably felt that we were going to be able to bring him in a situation where we could introduce him on a slower basis. But we kind of know now that we're having to try and fix this right side this month because we've alluded to it earlier on in the episode regarding Kizarides. He's getting doubled on now, and if we're having to find a position for Milne to play in midfield just now to fix an issue there, then we don't have somebody overlapping Kizarides. So, we've got a few issues that we're trying to tackle at the same time just now, and because of that, Chesnikov had to see game time a bit quicker than expected. Kurjota's a funny one. I like Kurjota. I like the idea of Kurjota as a player, but he's admitted himself that it's been quite a big step up for him in terms
He's a
of
project,
building
isn't
that
he?
physicality. And I suppose we have to trust that whatever Derek McInnes is seeing on a Monday to Friday still isn't quite filling him with enough confidence to
Hmm.
start him. So I suppose you've just got to put your trust in that.
Yeah,
And hopefully in
and
time, Kurjota will be ready to make an impact as well. But I still think what I've seen of Chesnikov in clips, playing back in his homeland in international football, I still think it offers you a bit more variety in terms of being able to hit the byline but also cutting as well. So I think once he's up to speed, I think you'll get to see something. It's just that, like Mercer said, it could be a few weeks, unfortunately, which who knows, that might that might be a bit too long given the circumstances we're in, but we just don't know at this stage.
Yeah, the PTSD of mentioning Gerard Taylor. I've spoken quite a lot on this podcast, Merce, about the WhatsApp group that we're in. You and me, the Hearts fans, two Rangers fans, Danny Chalmers and Ryan Gilbert, and a Celtic fan and David Ridden. I remember after the Hearts Rangers game when Taylor played and made his debut, I think the Rangers fans were wanting to offer us Cyril Dessers and as many millions as we want for Gerard Taylor. Riddy was wanting to offer us goodness knows what, so they could try and sign him as well. And then he had a jobby of a performance at Dundee the next week. So let's swiftly move on from Gerard Taylor. Just with regards to Kyrgiota, it is a massive step up. He was playing in the fourth tier in Italy last year. And Jamestown signings, you're not buying the end product. You're buying project players on some occasions, depending on the fee, and it was minuscule that we paid to get Kerjota. Or you're signing someone that you think could be somebody, and that's why you'll spend a little bit more money. So
Yeah,
Chznikov, the fanfare with Chznikov is why the expectations are so high. And that's why it's important that Hearts fans just give him a little bit of time until he is up to speed, as Scott said.
yeah, and I think that's an important shift in mentality that Hearts fans need to get their heads around. That these players that are being signed are coming from environments which are in some ways completely alien to what they're coming
Yep.
into in Scottish football. Carriotta's a prime example of that. I've just been a bit critical of him for not maybe being a bit more direct in the opportunities he's had. And like I say, that cross he had against Hibs has earned him quite a chunk of credit from the supporters to start off with. But it won't be too long before he's on the pitch again, and people will want to see something different. They'll say, "Come on, what else have you got in the tank?" So um, I think he's going to be an interesting player in the fullness of time. But yeah, these players that come in, they're not going to hit the ground running, and we just need to get used to that, really.
I just hope from a Kerjota's perspective, that's not his Wayne Foster moment. And you say to a Hearts fan, Wayne Foster, and immediately you get the goal at Easter Road
Uh-huh.
to win the cup tie in the 21st game of the unbeaten run. Hopefully, that's one of many things that Kerjota is subsequently known for. Scotty, I don't want to dwell too much on specifics in the Falkirk game. Was there anybody to blame for their goal when they took the lead after 59 minutes?
I hate to use the word blame. I think, if anything, it just highlighted
Who
how big a
fucked up
miss.
then, Scott?
I think, if anything, that goal highlights how big a miss Cammy Devlin could potentially be to us over the coming weeks and months. I think Blair Spittle finds himself in an area of the park that he really doesn't want to be in. He doesn't have the legs for that. And of course, he came into that situation quite cold as well. He'd only just been on the park 2 minutes, which really didn't help. So I think that highlighted that more than blame per se. You could possibly say Harry Milne doesn't cover the fact that he gets round Spittle. Milne's just nowhere near it in terms of being in the right position. But yeah, let's just look. Falkirk came out in that second half and played really well. They targeted us down that side. Uh, that's why they brought in Wilson. That was one of the reasons they brought in Wilson at half time, was to try and hit us down that right hand side, and it worked for them on a few occasions. There were a few dangerous balls coming in from either side. And yeah, it was just a bit unfortunate that Spill had only just been on the pitch 2 minutes into that game, and again, it's not really his game to be running back the way either. So that's just something we need to try and figure out before the Celtic game, is what we do in that type of scenario.
So we get the penalty. It's scored by Lawrence Shanklin. We go to extra time. However, Merce, I was just looking at the substitutes that we made in this game. So let's take you to the second period of extra time in this one. On the field for Hearts, Forrester, Kabangu, Chznikov, Findlay, Kabori, and Spittle. Those are the subs that were made. It's something I mentioned that we would talk about earlier. We have a big squad, but did that show us that we don't have a deep enough squad?
We don't have the depth. It was exposed, really, and I felt for Adam Forrester because presumably he was sitting up in Perth on Saturday afternoon or whatever and gets a phone call to get himself down to Edinburgh or something when we find out that Borshevic has pulled a hamstring in training. He's getting passed around on this cooperation deal. Um, and I like Forrester. I think he's got something in him. He's a young lad and he's getting plenty of game time uh, at the championship level. He played 25 games for us last season, and I don't think I thought he does his best, but he's thrown into that in a difficult situation in a difficult game. As Scott was saying, all hands on deck. Um, but I didn't think the players that we brought on there wasn't anyone we brought on that really had the ability to change the game, to really sort of give us that impetus that we needed at that time. And that really sort of underlines inequalities in some areas of our squad.
We've seen what Kabori's capable of, Scott, as a hold-up player when needed at Dens Park and against St Mirren as well. Cabangu, though, there was talk that he may still head down south or leave the club on loan or on a permanent deal. And I read an interesting message from someone saying, is he really good enough to keep someone like James Wilson out the team or to deny James Wilson the option? Whatever you think of James, this is a kid that was flying last season, got himself into the Scotland squad, but now finds himself way down the pecking order. Is it time to cut our losses on Elton Cabangu, Scott?
It's a strange one. There's a couple of ways that you can sort of dissect what happened on Saturday with the substitutions. You could look at it in terms of ability and contribution, Ikabangu and Kabori, and you could say it just wasn't good enough. It really wasn't good enough. They were second to every ball, just about. I suppose the flip side of that, to try and give them, try and protect them a little bit from criticism, is that I think the situation they come on to on Saturday is again not one that's going to get the best out of them either. I think if you think back to when they've been at their most effective this season, I think for me, Cabangu, there was a 20-minute cameo when he came on at Ibrox in a game where we were 1 goal up and then 2 goals up. That means that Rangers have to press high up the park, and that gives Cabangu a whole half to sort of run into and sort of exploit gaps behind the Rangers backline. He wasn't going to get that on Saturday. I think both teams just looked not happy to get to penalties, but were more than willing to sort of take penalties at the end of it. You know, there wasn't too many opportunities in extra time. Kabori as well, I think he's done relatively well in the last 2 sub appearances in games where we've been backs to the wall, 10 men, and just needed somebody to just, you know, if we're going to play a bit of possession football and just knock balls into the corners, we've just wanted somebody that could just sort of chase down those opportunities. And when he does get the ball, hold it long enough to invite other people to come and support him. Again, sparking things, coming short for the ball. There was a few opportunities where I felt like they were being let down by their teammates who, rather than trying to look for a ball that would get the best out of them, they were wanting Kabori and Cabangu to come short for it. And I just don't think that short game suits them compared to the likes of Shankland and Braga to a lesser extent. So I do feel for them because, again, I think it highlights that there's a type of forward that we're missing just now at the club. I think there is a different profile forward that we still need to bring in. Even if we were to keep the likes of Cabangu and Kabori and Wilson and that, I still think we're missing something a bit more traditional and target man-like up there that maybe would have helped us on Saturday. So I'll give them a bit of, you know, bit of the benefit of the doubt in terms of the circumstances that they came on, but they didn't do themselves any favours. Like I say, they were second to most balls, and unfortunately, the majority of our subs didn't really make much of an impact. Unfortunately, when you compare that to the triple change that Falkirk made at half time, you know, they all have a positive contribution for Falkirk for the remainder of that match.
A lot of narratives as a result of that answer from Scott. The latest name doing the rounds for Hearts, a striker who plays for Rouen in France and scored at the weekend in a 3-1 win at Versailles, is a French 24-year-old tall striker by the name of Amadou Bassi. Lawrence Shankland, it's looking like, we hope, that it was just cramp. We'll find out over the next couple of days the severity of the injury that saw him leave the field by his own accord at the weekend, but it looks like right now that he will hopefully be available for Sunday. So that's really good news. And the third thing, I was just looking back, Merce, and Scott, you'll remember this as well. When you used to go into the old shed at Tynecastle before your dad renovated the majority of the place, when you went in from the main stand side, there was a capital decorator sign with the Edinburgh skyline. If that was still there, that would have been hit by Cabangu's penalty, Merce. It was
Yes,
shite.
it was. Yeah. Oh, a terrible penalty. I know. I can never get my head around strikers who. Well, hold on. fair play to him for stepping up to take it. He obviously wanted to try and make an impact. He was on the pitch. He's a striker. He should be taking penalty kicks. But don't lean back when you kick the ball, And he made the cardinal sin of doing that, unfortunately. But he was obviously desperate to make an impact of sorts, but the impact hit the back of the stand, unfortunately.
Yeah, it wasn't great. So that was the game. We lost on penalties, like we did at St Mirren, and it was pish. But hey, positives, that gives us 4 less games potentially. That means that we'll be a lot fresher when we win the league, which is lovely. Questions about the game that are raised after the result. Scott, I'll start with this one for you. Should Derek McInnes have made more changes to his team and freshened things up, which would have meant we would have ended with a stronger side because we wouldn't have started with as strong a side?
I mean, he did make 5 changes for the team that started against St Mirren. So, I mean, he had changed nearly half the team. Benny was on the park. Benny had only played 14 minutes against St Mirren, so it wasn't like Benny needed a rest. I get the argument. I think this argument, has been highlighted more so because of the potential Shankland miss from the weekend. I think a lot of people are now playing captain hindsight because Shankland's came off with what we're hoping is just a case of fatigue and maybe a bit of cramp in his hamstring. And people are now saying, well, he shouldn't have been starting in the first place and that. I think we need to be a club who now want to fight on all fronts. Okay? Now, I'm not suggesting that we're at that stage. I think I've said quite a few times this season, where we are on this particular journey, we're ahead of schedule. We're way ahead of schedule. We've got a team that was probably built to fight for third spot, currently fighting for the top spot in the league, okay? So we're ahead of schedule in that respect. I would like us to go into games like the Falkirk game wanting to win it and therefore put out a relatively strong team to do that. I think that there's been an acceptance culture that's permeated at the club for a number of years now that comes off the back of people looking at a game like this and going, oh, well, it's fine because we're chasing this or we're doing that. I want to see us try and move from that mindset. Now that we're out of it, I've got no issue with fans trying to hang on to the positive aspect of that. And like you say, the positive is that it's, potentially 4 less games than what we might have had to have played if we'd went on a cup run. And at the end of the season, we may look back on Saturday and go, that actually in a weird way helped us. But we just don't know if that's going to be the case yet. But like I say, I've got no issue with fans saying that after the fact. I just think in the run up to it, it was vital that we put out as strong a team as possible. And that includes that front three. We don't, for me, because of Chznikov just coming into the country, Kurjota maybe not being up to speed yet, Kabangu and Kabori not really impressing overall when they've started games. We've got to start that front three because those guys have got enough quality where you only need one of them to come up with a bit of quality like Braga did against Dundee to win you the game. So I think it's imperative that we keep playing them as much as I think some people will think that that's the wrong thing to do and we're maybe running them into the ground. I think as long as these guys stay fit, they need to be playing week in, week out just now until we have a viable alternative. Whether we get Mato in over the next few days, that would be obviously a potential alternative to Kazarides on the left, and then obviously Chesnikov tries to get a bit more game time in that and time with the squad over the next few weeks as well.
And I think also Derek's game plan would have been presumably to play his key strikers, as Shankland, Braga, Kazarides, in a cup game at home. Get yourself in front, maybe 1 or 2, and then take them off after 60 minutes and have the benefit. But the game didn't play out like that, and they've ended up having to shuffle the deck on a number of ways. And I thought the way Shankland left the pitch, and the fact he went and sat on the bench and didn't go up the tunnel straight away and was walking around afterwards, I thought if this was really bad and if he would have been up that tunnel. So I took a bit of comfort from that it wasn't as a serious blow as what we hope it's not going to turn out to be, and it sounds positive at the moment, but hopefully touchwood will be okay for Sunday.
The one thing I just want to tie this...
Sunday?
Yeah, Sunday.
Yes.
Sunday against Celtic, indeed, because they play Thursday in Bologna.
Yeah.
the one thing I just want to finish this discussion off with before we move on is the fans. And I just really hope, and I said right at the start, Saturday night was sore, Sunday was still ouch. Monday was like, shit, out the cup, but we've now got Celtic. Let's focus on that one. I just really hope we're not back to square one, Scott, with all the work that the players and the coaching staff and the fans groups and podcasts and everything like that and kickback did to ensure that excellent atmosphere in midweek against St Mirren. I really hope we're not at a stage where we keep building, 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 and then all it takes is one bad result to knock us back to square one, a kind of snakes and ladders escapade, if you like, Scotty.
I don't think that'll be the case. If anything,
It shouldn't. It shouldn't.
if anything, a home tie against one of the old firms is good a fixture as you can hope for off the back. Having a reverse like Saturday, I think in terms of fans just feeling like they're up for it and wanting to come along and support the team. So I think that won't affect it. I think the fans will be right up for it. It'll then be a case of seeing how the team maybe come out and sort of start the game. Who's going to be starting? I think they'll try and get an hour out of McAtee. I think they'll ask him if he can take some form of injection that'll allow him to play some part. I think they'll then try and get an hour out of him and hope that that's enough to see us through. I think it'll then be a case of if Shankland, if it is just fatigue or cramp, that he comes back in as well. And then it doesn't seem as bad, you know. Ultimately, Cammy and Benny are going to be two big misses. What I would say though is that Benny missed the game at Parkhead, and I felt Thomas Magnusson played a really pivotal role that day, playing the sort of advanced player in the free, sort of sticking on top of McGregor. It'll be interesting to see what we do with the options we've got. Do you go with Milne and Magnusson and McAtee? Is that sort of midfield three that have just got legs and that's really ultimately their biggest trait? I think Magnusson plays better when he's a bit more advanced, and I thought he actually had a really good first half against Falkirk at the weekend. I thought it progressively got worse as the game went on, to the point that when he played it right back, I think I was just wanting him to come off just for his own sake by that time. But yeah, there's still options there, even although we're slightly depleted. I think we've still got options there to cause Celtic problems. It's just going to be whether one or two of the players are going to be fit enough to start. And once we see that, I think the fans will be up for it anyway, regardless of who starts the game.
So Falkirk go through on penalties, and they'll now face Stenhousemuir away from home. We would have lost to them on penalties anyway, so fuck it. You're listening to Scarves Around the Funnel, sponsored by Forrest Hepburn and McDonald's Signs, who've been offering creative sign and print solutions since the 1950s. Okay, Mr. Iain Mercer. I cannot believe it's 20 years ago since this book here, if you're watching on YouTube, Believe. And I had this idea, your father sadly passed 20 years ago. I wanted to see if you would be interested in writing a tribute to your dad, and I thought it was a very poignant tribute, lovely tribute in the book. One of the paragraphs in Believe, strangely enough, Dad never thought he was that highly regarded in Scottish football. He would never have understood why they would recognise him in such a way, which is quite strange given the amount of coverage he used to receive, and considering his ego was the size of Scotland. I'm sure he won't mind me saying that. Simple first question for you, Merce. What made your dad such a trailblazer in Scottish football?
He was young at the time. He had unique ideas. He had drive and ambition and a hunger and a passion to change the fortunes of the football club, because when he got involved, they were in the gutter. There were no money. They had problems off the pitch, problems on the pitch, and it really needed to be, dragged from the bottom up. And one thing he never shirked from was challenges, and that was a massive challenge when he took it over in 1981. And the only way was up at that point. And I think a lot of the things that he put together, and it wasn't just him, it was many other people involved on the board and obviously on the pitch, that set him apart from what was at the time, I suppose, a golden era of Scottish football in terms of the other clubs and what was going on in the wider environment, and some of the other sort of characters and personalities.
And when you think back at that time, Dundee United winning the league, Aberdeen winning the league, as well as Celtic and Rangers, and Hearts coming so close in 1986. Scott, when I say Wallace Mercer to you, what do you think of?
Well, it's a strange one for me given my age. So I started properly following the club and going to games right around the sort of 89-1990 season. So it was just at that stage where the period for Wallace Mercer was becoming more of a challenging one. So my memories and sort of observations of his time at the club have changed as I've got older, and I've then been able to go back and revisit what happened during the 80s. So I came in at a time where there was frustration with the support. There was obviously Alex McDonald was moved on, Joe Jordan came in, and there were still ambitious moves made to try and improve the sort of profile of the club. But then, towards sort of 93, 94, it became apparent that Wallace was wanting to sell his shares over to Chris Robinson and Leslie Deans, and then it was a whole new set of problems that we took on under their stewardship. So it was weird. I do recall, though, one of the things I always sort of remember, even when I was younger, was that when people made comparisons to Wallace and then to Chris Robinson and Leslie Deans, was that one of the things that fans would always say about him, regardless of whether their overall observation on him was negative or positive, was that he always fronted up to the challenge. As Mercer said there, I think whenever there was a protest, he was, I don't know if happy is the right word, but he was willing to come out and engage with fans and talk to fans about what they were annoyed about. He was willing to put himself out there and talk about challenges and reasonings or rationale behind his decision making. One of the clips that I've got on the website, which is one of my favourite ones to go back to, was I'm being invited on Scott Sport. I think it was a Sunday after Hearts had lost a league game at Aberdeen, and it was during the 88-89 season. So it was just after Robertson had been sold and reduced some of that money to bring in Iain Ferguson as his replacement. So Scott Sport had obviously done a sort of video segment with some Hearts fans at the Aberdeen game, and they were talking about facilities and they were talking about money not being spent and things like that. And he answered all the questions. Now, I'm not saying Hearts fans would agree with all the answers he gave, but he was there and he gave his answers. And I think that's one thing you could never knock him for, was that he was always putting himself forward to explain any decisions that he made in terms of the club and other things that he tried to do outside of the club a bit further into his stewardship. So that's one of the things I remember about him, albeit at an early stage in my Hearts supporting career, but then going back to revisit it, I think you get a better understanding as to just how bad a state Hearts were in when he took over and how close they were to really, going to the wall, even at that stage. I think he spent a lot of his own money to try and increase the profile at the club, and he took some risks as well. I think if you think back to that spell where he got rid of Alex McDonald, which wasn't a popular decision, they spent a lot of money on Derek Ferguson at that time as well. Again, they were trying to push things forward. It didn't all work, but I think the intent was there. There was that idea that we talked about last week with Biscuits about the selling the house, putting the, putting the house up as a competition at one of the home games and that. So there was a side to that character that I don't think you see seldom now in sort of owners. I think everyone's very media savvy, aren't they? And it'd be interesting to see if he'd be any different in today's world, whether he would react any differently, whether he would be maybe a bit more guarded, or whether he would just be that sort of flamboyant person that he was. Because I think one of the things that you hear, I subscribe to Graham Spears'
yeah, so do I.
podcast, and anytime
You've been on that a few times, Merce, haven't you?
Yeah.
I've been on it once, yeah.
Graham always talks about him with great warmth in terms of being the ideal chairman, because for journalists he was just gold. But he was also someone who treated the journalists well when they came to Tynecastle. So I think a lot of it for me, because I didn't get to see a lot of the decisions in that, a lot of it for me comes out about his character and how he sort of conducted himself And I think if you compare it to some of the other people we've had in charge since then, I'm not saying he got everything right, but I think one of the things I respect about how he handled himself was the fact that he put himself in front of the fans when things didn't go wrong. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that's missing in a lot of ownership now in football clubs.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
chuckle there, Merce.
I did, yeah. Well, no, because I know the media were very much well looked after, shall we say, especially on especially on big nights or European nights or after matches. I mean, he would often appear in the media room with a bottle of champagne or whatever, and um, I mean, you know how he used the media, but he used the media in a way to get messaging out, whether that to be to, and he was quite at the time that was quite a different thing to be done. We see managers doing it a lot now, and how we've talked about, we've seen Alex Ferguson used to do it, and Mourinho's done it, and this, that, and the other. But back in the 80s, Dad did it as well with the media. He appeared on Scott Sport, or he would go and do an interview which would resonate with the rest of the club or the fans, or it would set the tone, it would set the message. Um, I remember seeing it fairly recently on a YouTube video. I think in fact, it was the game that we got Hibs in the cup, the one that Wayne
Yeah.
Foster scored in, and the draw
This
was
is
made.
reaction to the draw.
He was in the boardroom at Partick Thistle, and it came through, got Hibs, and of course he's on it. Scott's, and his initial reaction was, "What a fix, what a fiddle!" But then he said, "Great draw. That's a great draw for us." And immediately it set the tone that no, we'll go to Easter Road and we'll win that game. Do you know what I mean? And sort of there was a lot of that, and he was very good at that.
He was larger than life. I remember getting his autograph. He used to stand at the wall at the tunnel in the family enclosure. I'd get his autograph at every home game, and he would always be polite. It wasn't, "I've already signed that." But he took up the whole page. It was like, this is my club. I'm having all of this page in this autograph book. And he was larger than life. Would you say there's any part of you that's similar to your dad, Nurse?
Well, you'd have to ask. You probably need to ask other people about that. Ask my mum or something. Um, I don't know. I'd like to think that there, for sure. I think there is some parts of me that would resonate.
Are
But
you a risk taker
I don't
like
know.
him?
Not on the levels that he was at. No, no, no. I mean, as Scott alluded to when he first bought into the football club, he put a lot of his own personal money into the football club at the time. I know the family house was on the line for a good 3 or 4 years before that could be taken off the line. There was a huge personal investment, which supported the football club through its initial stages until it got itself back on its feet again. And it takes balls to do that, and especially at his age, he was only 35.
Hmm.
It's very young. In fact, younger than that when he first got involved. And I think of myself now in the age that I'm at, and I'm still in my 40s before you say anything, Scott. Uh, you know, and I think of myself now in my career trajectory, and I think, wow, what he achieved at that time and the things he was doing was quite incredible, really.
In a previous life, Scott spent a lot of time putting together all the old clips, getting them from VHS, Betamax, God knows what, digitizing them, and he's got the wonderful Amoruso Lets It Run channel, of which, of course, your father is a big part of that. Does it make you smile or sometimes cringe, depending on what your dad did, when you've got all this access to such good content from your dad?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it makes me chuckle. I mean, when I think back about that draw that was made and his initial reaction, I mean, could you imagine somebody saying that nowadays? And their sort of furor. I've been asked a lot, how would your dad cope with social media and with X and Facebook and Instagram and all of these sort of things? And I think you'd be terrified by the whole lot of it, to be quite honest. You'd be in a lot of hot water. Um, but yeah, it is. There's a lot of nice clips out there and a lot of interesting stuff. And on the point of books, I mean, I don't know if you remember this book, but
Yes, a heart to heart, the
the Heart to
anatomy of a
Heart,
football
which
club.
yeah. So there's not many copies of this probably still in circulation, but that was an interesting. There's a few interesting stories in there, but reading back there in terms of the early days and how they rebuilt the football club from where it was, um, it was just a fantastic journey really all the way through. So
Wallace Mercer is holding a press conference tomorrow to announce that Wallace Mercer will be holding a press conference on Monday. That's the kind of thing that was spoken about. He would attend the opening of an envelope. There's so many wonderful stories. When
well,
he
it's
sold, sorry.
well, no, I was going to say, as he always said, his business card would say, in the event of my demise, hold a press conference, and and to a point, that's exactly what I did. I mean, when he passed away, I put a 2 or 3 line statement out through a close family friend of ours out to the news wires, and the next day there was a lot of coverage for a couple of days. So, and I think the fact that he had a good relationship, with a lot of the sports journalists, that was reflected in the coverage that was there after he passed away.
Hugely. There was no cava or prosecco with the media. It was the proper good old French stuff
Yeah.
from near the chateau in France, the family chateau in France. I've told this story on the podcast before about when you and me were both in the boardroom at the same time, but we didn't know each other. Back in 1994, your dad sold the club to Leslie Deans and Chris Robinson. You were there, of course, with your family. I was on work experience at Radio Forth. At that time, what was the hope of the Mercer family as to what Hearts would become under this new ownership?
Um, I mean, I think the hope was that the football club would then go on to make big strides forward, that the stadium would continue to be developed, um, that a lot of what was agreed to at the time would be carried out, and unfortunately, it was the exact opposite of that. And what ended up was a very unfortunate and fractious relationship with the new owners of the football club at the time. And you know, um, that was one of Dad's biggest disappointments, and I suppose biggest regrets was selling the football club to the Deans and Robinson regime. Um, Neither of whom are with us, and I won't speak ill of them, but it was a very unfortunate period of his life and of ours as well, because they raised court actions within a matter of days of selling the football club, which then rumbled on for a good number of years afterwards, and that was a huge disappointment. Um, they threw a lot of money at it, and they managed to deliver something that he had strived to do, and been unable to do, which was to deliver a trophy to the football team. They managed to achieve that in 1998. Um, he wasn't invited to the cup final. He wasn't there, and I don't think he could have been there anyway, um, with them still as the owners. So, as did the club change and move on? Yes, it did. Did it move on for the better? Not so sure.
One of the things you wrote in your tribute to your dad in Believe was this. One of my father's lasting legacies at Tynecastle is the 3 stands he began redeveloping in the 1990s to ensure the stadium complied with the Taylor Report. He put the initial funding in place through the successful 500 Club, and that allowed the construction of the Wheatfield stand to commence in 1994. The capital resources required for the next 2 stands, the Roseburn and the Gorgie, were also put in place before he sold his interest in the club to Chris Robinson and Leslie Deans. Sadly, they tried to take all of the credit themselves and never invited Dad back to see the completed project, which was a bitter disappointment. The sad thing here, Scott, is, as Iain has just said, and it's maybe more information than a lot of us knew, how bitter it was as far as the relationship between Wallace Mercer and the subsequent owners, Chris Robinson and Leslie Deans. How much of that at the time were we as fans kind of aware of?
I don't think we were overly aware of it, for what I recall. I think It's sort of different now, isn't it? You know, you get access to so much in terms of what goes on at football clubs. Media, clubs can control their own media narrative as well. And I think if something like that was to happen nowadays, the fans would be more than aware of it because I think the club would want to make sure that their spin on the proceedings was being well presented and out there for everyone to see and hear. I think back then there wasn't really that same appetite for goings on behind the scenes at football clubs. Uh, so it wasn't something that really resonated with me as a younger supporter. But I can understand why things like that would happen in the background. I think, given the amount of time that Wallace Mercer had put in at the club, I think even although he was selling his shares, I would probably imagine he would have quite liked to have had the courtesy or respect in maybe being asked his opinion on maybe how to do things or how to keep steering the ship going forwards. And it's maybe been a case that, the other two individuals involved didn't see it that way. And there's been issues that have sort of arisen off the back of that. But I mean, that's business, isn't it? People that to get where Wallace Mercer and Chris Robinson and Leslie Deans did in the football world, you need to have a certain level of ego to get into that scenario. And I think, unfortunately, when you've got egos on both sides, it's probably going to lead to sort of a bit of an unfortunate sort of ending at the end of it. But I think it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to be present at a situation like the '98 final. I think
It
Yes.
ultimately,
happened. It happened with the next regime. I mean, the next regime, which was the Romanov regime, um, he gave advice to Sergei Fedotowicz at the time and how they could run their corporate department and how they could get commercial revenues. And he was asked a view and he gave his view. Whether or not they listened to it or not, I don't know. But he always cared deeply for the football club. The notion that he was only ever in it for himself or all of this sort of stuff. He cared deeply for the football club and what happened to it. And he was always eager to try and, I don't know, what was it? Almost putting the reins back on him to not get back involved again. There was other people doing it now, and he'd led it from the front for so long. For 13 years is a long time to do it, and he was the spokesperson, the front man, the front show, the show. Call it what you like. It was his show, really. He was chairman, chief executive. He carried the pressure, the strain, and when he moved on, it was time to move on. It was probably time to move on before he did, but it was difficult to find a suitable exit.
Ian, do you think that sort of flamboyant side? Do you think because he was so flamboyant and because he had that larger than life character, especially when presenting himself in the media, do you think there was a certain degree of maybe vulnerability that people didn't see, which therefore they then interpret as being he doesn't care about the club? Do you think that there was maybe just a misinterpretation as to his intent because he was such a big character and almost acted as if nothing could touch him, nothing could
Mm-hmm.
bother him? Do you think that maybe had that kind of when you think back to it now, the optics of fans would then just maybe go to, oh well, he's just he loves himself and he loves
Yeah,
it. He loves the fact that he's at the front of that sort of situation.
exactly. No, no, I could absolutely see that. I mean, he wasn't exactly a shrinking violet. He was driving around in a flash car with a private number plate and all the
Sounds like
rest of
you,
it. And
Mers.
on every sports program and back page and everything else. But that's how we did it, and it goes for the territory. You can't build that sort of machine and then and not take the rough with the smooth. So yeah, absolutely.
Here's how humble he was. What was the name of his show on Radio 4th?
The Wallace Mercer Hour
Could have called it anything. Nope, the Wallace Mercer Hour. What's it about?
and
Me? For how long? An hour?
and the TV program. Don't forget the TV program,
What was
which
that
was
called?
Wallace Mercer and Friends, which was
Surprised
a
the Friends got a mention.
which was a 1 hour special. I think it was given to 4 or 5 people in Scotland. I can't remember who, and
Who were his
Yeah.
friends that he interviewed? Remember?
So the guests on the programme were Anita Roddick, who was the
Oh,
owner of the
Body
Body
Shop.
Shop,
Yep.
Sir Clive Sinclair, who designed the C5 car,
Oh, wow.
Jimmy Gulliver, who ended up being on the Hearts
Yes,
board,
James Gulliver. Yeah.
James Gulliver, who was at that time, um, a huge sort of business figure in his own right.
These are more prince
Uh,
and princesses than paupers, Merce.
and I'm trying to think. I think that was the three guests. That was the three
Wow.
guests. Yeah. So
Sheesh.
I know.
Um, one of the other things that you said, Dad said to me on a number of occasions that he thought Vlad was living in a fairy tale land if he thought Hearts could win the Champions League within 10 years. You say he was a supporter of Vlad at the time, but he wasn't impressed with how he dealt with the likes of Burley and Fowkes and Phil Anderton because it was the way he treated people, and that's not the way your dad treated people. Football is a personality-led business, he said. What do you think he would have made of Tony Bloom?
Well, I mean, just going back to that, I mean, by then he was back going to the games regularly. He was sitting in the main stand, and he used to go to the games every week with Pilmer Smith, who was
Yes.
obviously his vice chairman at the time when they had when he was chairman, and he was good pals with George Fowkes. So there was a regular Friday evening dinner, I think, with Smith and Fowkes, and all things Hearts and Romanov
Wow.
regime were
Oh, to be a
dissected.
fly on the wall. Goodness.
Yes, yeah,
Who
some
picked up the
stories.
check?
Mr. Fowkes, of course.
Thanks.
I'm not
Very
sure.
good.
Don't know. Um, so, so yeah. I mean, he was. I think he enjoyed the roller coaster ride to a point of the whole regime with Mr. Romanov, and we still had some interest at the time because we owned the building, the McLeod Street ticket office, which they had to acquire to be able to, which they eventually acquired.
You did the
So
deal,
they
didn't
had
you?
a, I did do the deal, yeah, I
Hmm.
did. That was
Was it
interesting.
straightforward?
Never, no, no. But it didn't involve a basement vault in Vilnius, that's for sure.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Aye, well.
so anyway, where were we? Tony Bloom. What would you think? I would think he would be quite fascinated, really, about how he has made his money and the entrepreneur that he is and what he's done with Brighton. And I think he'd love to have sat down and had a good coffee with him and a chat, for sure.
He'd have more than a coffee, Merce. With the champagne collection he had.
Hmm.
Yeah, you just sip your water and take the
Yeah.
fifth. That's your dad, what you think your dad would think about Tony Bloom. What do you think about Anne Budge? Because she put together the final piece of the jigsaw, the main stand, after your dad's legacy of doing
Yeah.
the other three stands was complete. What did you make of her time at the club and what she did for Heart of Midlothian?
Over the piece and all in all, I think she did a very, very good job for the football club. And in many ways, there's many parallels between the two regimes. The club were within days of going out of business when Dad took it over, and we were within days of going out of business when Anne Budge stepped in and managed to put the money together, the funding together. She put her money where her mouth is. She committed, and she had to build the club back up again from the ashes of what it was. Um, and I think she has probably exited at the right time. I think there comes to a point where you reach a shelf life, a point where it's time to move on. And I've got nothing but admiration for what she's done for the football club. She's made mistakes along the way. There's no question about that. She's admitted that. Um, but if you look at where the club is now and where it was when she took it over in 2012, 2013, it's it's a remarkable change.
Hmm. Mm. It,
Um,
it, it's knowing when to let go, isn't it?
it's knowing when to let go. I did have a bit of a wry smile to myself when she was announced as the honorary life president because it's a title that was awarded to Dad when he sold the club in 1994. So he was the first honorary life president of the football club. And that was one of the privileges which was agreed in the contract with the Robertson regime and was promptly removed through a court order within about 7 days, but was reinstated because it was overturned 2 years later. But I would not diminish Anne Budge's achievements at that football club. She's done a fantastic job over the piece, I feel.
Yeah, talking about knowing when to let go, you mentioned in your tribute, in the end, one of the main reasons Dad gave up his position at Hearts was because he could no longer compete financially with the old firm. It was as simple as that. Time moves on, and we're delighted to have had both in the history of Heart of Midlothian Football Club what your father did. Penultimate question is in two parts. The first one goes to Scott, and the second one will become apparent to you, Merce. And it's Scott's recollection of when Robbo came back to Hearts from Newcastle. I know it was around the time you were starting to go to games, but you've obviously, Scott, uploaded a lot of content to Amoruso Lets It Run. What do you remember about who was involved when Robbo returned from Newcastle?
This is probably definitely more of a retrospective sort of look back at it. I think obviously when Robbo left, there was a contract dispute, wasn't there? Which ultimately left him going down to Newcastle. I think what always impresses me about the fact that he comes back up the road is that we had an owner slash chairman at the time that was willing to put that previous dispute that had only happened months before. It wasn't a case of years being passed and, water going under the bridge. It had only happened a few months previous, but I think he realised that something needed to be done for the club at that stage in terms of, we'd spent money on Iain Ferguson. It hadn't really worked out. He wasn't really a direct replacement for Robbo. The team were, albeit doing well in Europe, but were struggling a little bit in the league to score goals. And between him and the name of the local businessman, who I have completely
Daher.
forgotten.
Ramesh.
That's
Ramesh
correct.
Daher.
They were able to put together a package to make sure that Robbo came back up the club. So I think when you look at that situation, without being there, being behind the scenes to see exactly what happened, which led to the initial contract dispute, I think one thing that's for certain to anyone observing it from the outside is that it says a lot about the man that he was able to get an agreement and get chatting over the table so quickly afterwards to make sure that the right thing happened for the club. And ultimately, Robbo ended up with his winner's medal years later, so it worked out well for everyone.
Okay, Scott McIntosh has just won the penalty. To convert the penalty, the next voice you're about to hear is the reason why John Robertson returned to Hearts.
Well, Robbo and I have had a chuckle about this on a number of occasions. And my partner is, fairly small, but could have been quite influential as well. We often had debates around the Sunday lunch dinner table about, in the chaotic life that we led at the time, and chaotic, I mean, there was so much going on. We lived in a media focus. Sunday afternoons were quite sacrosanct for the family to be together and have Sunday lunch together, as everyone tries to do nowadays. But we talked often about football and the teams and this, that, and the other. And I was asked my opinion on John Robertson. There was talk about him coming back up the road. We could get him back from Newcastle. What do you think? And I said, Dad, can you afford not to bring him back up the road? And those words seemed to resonate with him. To the point that I'm sure the decision had already been taken. But a few days later, John Robertson walks through the doors at Tynecastle and he's a Hearts player again. And that story has continued over the years and has been regaled to Robbo himself and various others. Homer Smith was told it. I think he passed it on to Ramez. So there we are.
Do you
Back of the
realise,
net.
back of the net from Mercer, but you do realise if that had been your father that I had just asked the question, he would have taken a lot more credit than you just have. You were very magnanimous there, Merce.
Well, that was
Without
10.
me,
There was many
you
other people involved in that transaction to bring Robbo back up.
were 10, weren't you?
I was 10 at the time, yes. So, you know,
The following year, because he came back just in time for the Bayern game, I think it was. Your, your dad, tell me why your dad got in trouble for that.
now, yeah, well, I mean, that was the infamous sort of agreeing to switch the TV rights or turn the satellite signal back on when he shouldn't have turned it on. I don't know the full ins and outs of that, but I do know he got a fine from UEFA of £500,000, I think it was, and he appealed it and challenged it, and it got doubled. Or it got bumped up to £750,000. So that was an expensive one. But I don't know the full ins and outs of how that one came about.
There is a piece from the Herald in their archives from June the 7th, 1989. Mr. Wallace Mercer says he is devastated by UEFA's ruling as he travelled to Switzerland to hear of news of the appeal. Yeah, that was and then do I remember as well Slavia Prague? That I've still got the VHS. Scotty, you can help me here. I've got the VHS. I think Archie McPherson might have
Archie
commentated
McPherson
it
does the commentary, but it's pretty
because
much like Hearts because it's one
it's Hearts
camera.
TV at the time, wasn't
Aye,
it? It was
it's
Hearts TV at
it's
the
the
time.
initial, it's the infancy of Hearts TV because it's literally just one camera trying to
Hmm.
follow the game, sort of back and forth. The footage, it's not brilliant, but we were
I
able
just
to,
wanted a full house,
we were
apparently.
able to put a video off the back of it. But am I right in thinking then the issue with the Bayern game is that what led to us having a blackout for the Dnipro and Bologna games because there was no TV coverage that campaign.
Mm,
So that would have been the year after the 1991 season.
yep.
Uh, those home games didn't get televised, and I think was his thinking try to increase the home crowds for those ones.
Yes, I think so. To be honest, Scott, I don't have a full sort of recollection of the events around that. But a pretty dim view was taken of it by UEFA at the time, and a substantial fine. I mean, if you think of the fines nowadays for matters which are
Yeah, like five
far
grand or yeah, it's
five
nuts.
I
grand
know.
for racially abusing somebody or something like that from the crowd, and he got hit with a £750,000 for switching on the satellite signal for the match to be played. Yeah, totally out of proportion.
Last one, and I do recall a little bit when you were on with Graham Spears on the press box. He is good friends with Jerry McNee, and I think this is another story that may have grown arms and legs over the years. But apparently, a Mister Double, it's a Wallace Mercer. It's not Wallace Mercer. It's a Wallace Mercer. That's how he signed his name, Alexander Wallace Mercer, apparently called a Mr. Jerry McNee in the summer of 1990 after McNee had made an early trip to Italy ahead of the World Cup where Scotland were playing. And the story goes that Mercer said to McNee, I need you to do me a favour, I need you to call Alex Ferguson, I want him to be the next Hearts manager. Here's the terms and conditions, he can have what he wants, shares and everything. That's what we've heard. Can you fill us in as to what the real story was and how close Alex Ferguson was to becoming Hearts manager?
Um, Again, I mean, where were they? They were in Rapallo, which was on the Italian coast. That's where the Scottish team were staying. Um, I think I know there was plenty of press entertainment on that trip. There were stories of Dad hiring a boat and driving it round the coast with various drunken members of the Scottish press pack.
So he was
Um,
ahead of Romanov in getting a boat.
yes, I think he
There you
was.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Fortunately, he wasn't in charge of the boat. I don't think he was driving it. Certainly not driving it back to the hotel after their fairly liquid lunch. But there was journalists on there, the likes of Brian Scott and Ian Paul and these sorts of guys. And yeah, I mean, the story I was told was that Jerry was in those days, as we know, the journalists were used as ways of getting
Yeah.
to speak to managers, to players, and Jerry was very much asked to approach Mr. Ferguson and ask whether or not he would be interested in coming to be the next Hearts manager. And I think there was a signing on fee of about, I think it was £100,000 signing on fee, and a six-figure salary on top of that, a 4-year contract, shares, buy him a house. I mean, they threw the kitchen sink at it, and he was deadly serious about it. And I don't think it got to the point whereby he was about to jump on a plane up to Edinburgh to discuss it. I think he was politely said that it wasn't for him and he was going to see how things worked out at Manchester United. But at that time, that was the sort of level of his thinking. And his next approach was to Joe Jordan, who then became the next Hearts manager.
Scott, your recollections back then, because Alex Ferguson has confirmed the story, and as Mer said, he just felt that he had unfinished business to do at Old Trafford, and it goes to Wallace's way of thinking and the kind of Italian style that Joe Jordan kind of tried to implement at Hearts. It just showcases how he was forward thinking. It didn't work with Joe Jordan ultimately. That defeat, I think it was May 1993 at Falkirk, 6-0 did for him. But to go from Sir Alex Ferguson, or Alec Ferguson as he was back then, to someone like Joe Jordan, even although he felt he didn't have the money to catch Rangers and Celtic, as Mercer has said before, his dad still felt like he wanted a big name in charge of the football club.
Yeah, and look, I think there's one thing you can say, and it's that there was certainly plenty of ambition when it came to looking at potential managers. I mean, even going back closer to his formative years at the club, Jim McLean was somebody that he sort of made a sort of overture towards, and of course that would have always been difficult to execute. But I think it shows that he had an idea as to how to help improve on the reputation of the club, because I think this is something that a lot of Hearts fans struggle to comprehend, that have maybe only started following the club from around the mid-80s onwards, which is just how much of a basket case the club had been for a number of years, for about the mid-70s to the early 80s. That was when the proper sort of yo-yo years were in place, and we were not a force to be reckoned with. You know, we were getting relegated with very, low points on the board, getting hammered left, right, and centre. And even when Wallace Mercer first came in, it wasn't all rosy either. There was the season when we failed to get promoted. I think that's one of the other video clips I recall is Wallace Mercer having to come out and ask for peace amongst Hearts fans, because I think we'd maybe lost to Motherwell that day, and trying to sort of clinch the championship. So, like I say, definitely wasn't without his challenges, but I think he always had ambitious thoughts in mind. Obviously, as it got into the late 80s, early 90s, I think he realised that it was difficult to realise those ambitions because of the financial gulf that we'd kind of created that somewhat, because that 85-86 season, I think for Rangers, that was where they had already seen Dundee United and Aberdeen stretch ahead of them, and now you were seeing Hearts joining that group as well, and that was almost like Rangers just went, we need to move on. We need to find a way of doing things differently. So it did inadvertently start because of how well we progressed over a 2 or 3 year period. So you should take credit for that. But yeah, by the time it got to the early 90s, there was obviously, different things mooted to try and help the club in terms of, relocating stadium, merging with Hibs and that. And it was just all things that were going to be very difficult to try and execute. By the time it got to sort of 93, 94, like we'd mentioned with Anne Budge earlier, it was probably one of those cases of time had passed and it was probably time to move on and give somebody else a sort of crack at the whip. But
Yeah.
I mean,
If you look at the growth, the trajectory of growth from 1981 to 1990, barely being able to pay the players, to then offering Alex Ferguson 9 years later, the opportunity to become the Hearts manager with a six-figure signing on fee, a 4-year contract, and that ambition in that period of time, it was really explosive. And you narrow it down even further. I always think that his best spell to a point was the golden era from 86 to 90, when we had that, going for the league title and the double in that year, and unfortunately not making it, but rebuilding the team in 87, 88, 89, 90, and consistently year on year on year having a competitive team on the pitch, competing at the top end of the league, and missing out on the UEFA Cup semi-final as well in 88, 89. That period of time was the utopia, really. And, when it got to 1991, and unfortunately it didn't work out with Joe, you start to sort of go over the hill, and your shelf life comes, and you need to know when to move on and when to go. But he couldn't have sustained that energy and drive that's required to get it to that point, because it takes a lot. And again, going back to Ambudge, I can absolutely see you cannot drive it for that period of time and not feel the effects of it.
You've got to remember as well, Hearts had a good season under Joe Jordan in 91, 92, victorious at Celtic Park, finishing second in the league to Rangers. It was a decent spell back then. One of the other reasons why Rangers strengthened or were able to do so under David Holmes and others is because English clubs were banned from playing in European competition after Heysel in 85, and English players, the big ones who played for England and the likes, wanted to play at the top level. So that's why Rangers made a move. Souness called in a few contacts, and yeah, the whole history, it's all intertwined. And it's nice that Wallace Mercer has a place well, of course, it's at the top table. You wouldn't see Wallace sitting with a plastic cup at a side table waiting on something to happen. He'd have his bottle of Roederer champagne or whatever. Wonderful reminiscing with Wallace's son, Iain Mercer, on the 20th anniversary of the sad passing of Wallace Mercer. You're listening to Scarves Around the Funnel, sponsored by Forrest Hepburn and McDonald Signs, who've been offering creative sign and print solutions since the 1950s. Well, I wonder what your dad would have made of the 30 minutes of added time that we seem to have played. Normally this is an hour, but when we've got you on, I love to reminisce with you and get all your stories about your dad. We're going to end with Hearts against Celtic on Sunday. We're recording this Monday night. It's very difficult to try and predict a lineup, knowing that we don't know if Shankland will be available. We hope he will be. Will Rodgers matter? Will a deal be done in time? Will there be a striker signed this week? Will there be a defensive midfielder signed? Will McIntosh get a jab so that he can play? A lot of ifs, buts, and maybes. I just want to end simply before we get predictions from Scott, myself, and Merce. There's zero, absolutely nothing, Scott, to be frightened of. This is a really poor Celtic side. The Celtic fans, for once, and it's been forever that they've been shitting themselves about a trip to Tynecastle, they're not looking forward to this. So we should be, shouldn't we?
Yeah, yeah. I still think there's plenty to look forward to. I still think there's Celtic are a funny side. Obviously, individually speaking, they still have the better players in certain areas of the park. But I think what we have come to appreciate about this Hearts team this year is that as a collective, we are stronger than our immediate rivals, and that's been the bedrock of our success. It's been bringing in a manager who understands the league well, understands what's required of players to play in this league, which is something that you couldn't say about certain appointments that Rangers and Celtic have made throughout the season. And I think a mixture of that and him being able to get the best out of what was already a spine of the team. The spine of that Hearts team was already there prior to Derek McInnes coming in. It's just needed him to fine tune it. And other things to work in our favour as well, in terms of Craig Halkett's fitness being at the best it's been during his 6.5 years at the club. So having that spiny Halkett, Beningame, Devlin and Shankland, and then just adding that little bit of stardust around it has been pivotal. And that's still there. Even although we're missing certain elements, I still think the overall work rate, desire, and attitude and enthusiasm and belief within the squad will still be there, even if some of the components are there. So I still think we've got enough to win this game at the weekend. And we have something that Celtic don't have just now, and that's cohesion as a football team. Like I say, Celtic have still got some good individuals that you need to respect, but we've shown in two other games this season that we can stop those players, primarily McGregor. I think if you look back to the previous game at Tynecastle, McGregor gets the run of the place for about 20 minutes in that first half, but then McIntosh identifies that he sort of asks Braga and Shanklin to take alternate turns to just drop in on him in the second half. And then when it comes to us playing at Parkhead, we switch from a midfield 2 to a midfield 3, and you see Thomas Magnuson playing that advanced role. So I don't think that's going to be an issue we're going to have at the weekend. I think we'll know what we need to do to try and win that midfield battle. It's just whether we've got the individuals available to do it. I'm still quite confident that Shanklin will be fine to start. I'm quite confident that they'll try and get McAtee to play 60 minutes. I've just got a funny feeling they'll ask him, and I just think he's that type of character. He'll probably try it. He just strikes me as that type of individual and professional that'll give it his best shot. And then it's just a case of just everyone else needing to be on their game. But we've still got a threat on the counter and from set plays, and I've said this all season. These are the fixtures that we relish because we're actually a really good team in transition. The thing that we need to build on just now as a club is how we play and break teams down when we've got 60-70% of the game. You don't have that concern when you play against Celtic. You can give them the ball a little bit more. The crowd aren't going to get angsty with that. And then it's just about how quickly we can turn the ball over and hit them on the break. So I'm still really confident for Sunday, even if we maybe aren't quite at full strength.
Yeah, no need for a podcast involving BBC and Evening News and Heart Standard and This Is My Story and Scarves Around the Funnel this week to generate an atmosphere. It's going to be brilliant on Sunday. I'll be really jealous, and those of us who are unable to be at Tynecastle will all be jealous of those who are there. Speaking of Hearts against Celtic with team selection issues, Tuesday, 17th of September 1996, 4 players sent off at Ibrox the previous Saturday. Hearts played with Andy Thorne making his debut, Gary Naismith playing his second game for the club and winning a bike for being man of the match, Kevin Thomas starting and Hearts winning by 1-0 in the League Cup quarter-final after John Robertson scored 10 minutes from the end of extra time. Merce, 6 points of a gap between Hearts and Celtic. Hearts are top with a better goal difference than Celtic. If Hearts win to make it 9 points and increase the goal difference, does it become a 2-horse race on Sunday?
No, I don't think it does. I still think that Rangers are well and truly in the title race, and I think it's going to go all the way. I think it'll go all the way to the wire this season. And I think with the lead that we've got, I don't think it's a game that we need to chase. I think it's a game we want to win for sure because we're at home. But if we come out of that game, we've still got a 6-point lead and it's a draw. I think that's okay. I don't think it's a game we need to go and chase and harry and sort of and take that approach to it. I'm optimistic, and I'm actually seeing nothing still in that Celtic side that gives me any cause for concern. And unless they suddenly sign an exemplary midfielder or striker this week, my opinion won't change before kick-off at the weekend. And I was cheered to see that they but they didn't exactly blow Auchinleck Talbot away at the weekend. From what I've heard, it was a pretty flatline performance. I think we've identified the dangers in that team. I think if we can control Callum McGregor and make sure he doesn't get too much of the ball, I think we have the capabilities to win the game. And I still think, as Scott says, I think we're a threat from set pieces. We have been all season. We've still got an abundance of good players in the park. And I think that the players just need to go out, puff their chests out. We're top of the league and go and take the game to them. Why not?
Scott, do Hearts knock Celtic out the title race if we beat them on Sunday?
No, and I think the evidence for that is only a month ago when we beat Rangers. I think people were writing off Rangers at that point because there was a 9-point gap. I still think, albeit Rangers and Celtic are maybe not at the peak of their powers, they're still two clubs who are still capable of putting together a winning run to stay in touch with the leading pack. So I don't think this knocks Celtic out of it. I think what's doing Celtic damage is probably the lack of activity in the transfer market, and Martin O'Neill didn't sound overly enthusiastic on that or forthcoming with information yesterday when he was interviewed after the cup tie with Auchinleck. I find their strategy very interesting and almost funny to an extent. I mean, over the last week, the two big rumours from Celtic fans is that they've been looking at a striker at Leeds United who just so happened to be owned by the Rangers owners. So I'm pretty
Yes.
sure they're not going to look to strengthen Celtic. And the other player they were being linked with was Evan Ferguson at Brighton,
Brighton.
who are also owned by Tony Bloom, who has a stake in Hearts. So it is getting to a stage now where you almost think it's self-sabotage that's going on there. I mean, although I wouldn't write off Celtic, I would say that Rangers are probably our biggest threat just now because they've shown real intent in the transfer market this month, and there seems to be unity between the fans and the board and the manager. I think what the Rangers fans appreciate is that when it was apparent that it wasn't working with Russell Martin and we fell well in Stewart, that the board acted relatively quickly on that. So I think there's trust in the board, there's trust in the manager currently, and although they've not been brilliant in games, they're keeping a lot of clean sheets and they're getting by just now. So I think they're probably the biggest threat. I think Celtic just now, because of all the other issues that are going on off the park, although I wouldn't write them off, I'd say they're probably the third favourites just now, just based on that.
Okay, prediction time. Celtic have lost more games than Rangers this season. They've lost more games than Hearts this season. They've lost more games than Motherwell this season. And they have also lost more games than Hibernian this season. Will they lose again at Tynecastle on Sunday? Mr. Iain Mercer.
Yes, they will. It'll be 2-1. Hearts 2-1. Yep.
And a Hearts goal scorer, please, sir.
Um, I think you'll get Stuart Finlay from a corner or a set piece of some description.
Okay.
And I think we'll finally see a Braga goal at home, which we haven't seen for quite a while.
Scott.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-1 as well. And Kizarides is going to get a goal.
And I'm going to complete the triumvirate of 2-1 predictions, and I'm going to go for Stuart Finlay's central defensive partner, Craig Halkett, from a corner or a free kick. So hopefully we're all right. I'll take 3-1 or 4-1, but I'd be happy with 2-1. And hopefully Celtic's seventh defeat of the season. It's been great. It's been longer than we expected, so apologies to everyone listening for that. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We trip down memory lane in the middle. We will be back next week, hopefully, to talk about Hearts being 9 points clear of Celtic. And do you know what? I don't even know who Rangers are playing, and I don't care, because if we do our job between now and the end of the season, then that is all that matters. And you know what? When we are lifting aloft the Scottish Premiership trophy, that defeat against Falkirk in the Scottish Cup, although it hurt at the time, won't hurt as much come May. Bye for now.